And we are back. We are live on the Greyhorn Pagans Podcast once more. Once again, thank you all for joining. With me today is Todd, aka DM Blackwall, once more for the third time now. Second time with me. First was with Raven.
Yep.
Last time we did the Arthurian legends, which was very interesting. And today we'll be talking dragons. I absolutely love dragons. They're amazing mythological creatures. But first things first, for everyone who may not know you yet or hasn't been paying attention the last two times you were on, if that's the case, then like, what the hell are you doing? But introduce yourself to the good people. Who are you? What are you about? What do you do?
Sure. My name's Todd. I'm a Christian. I am also a fantasy RPG author and amateur historian. I like reading a lot of primary sources and translations of primary sources of historical events. And so, and as far as the fantasy RPG goes, if you look up Horde Wars Basic, it is currently for sale on Drive-Thru RPG, and it is also for sale on Big Geek Emporium. So you can get that in either place. We also do sell physical copies via email, which is hordewars@blackwallgames.com. But in any case, for today, we're going to be talking about, were dragons mythological? Because I would argue there's excellent evidence they were not.
Yeah, I mean there are so many stories and so many different variations of dragons, and I've even heard on, I don't know if those guys are still on actually, but the Unlocking the Code podcast, a couple of Aussies who were trying to make the case that like dinosaurs are dragons, like they're not the dinosaurs that we know from science and popular media and etc., but that they were actually dragons.
Well, as far as the terminology goes, that's obviously true. For example, if you got an encyclopedia from the 1700s or the early 1800s, you would read about dragons as real creatures because the word dinosaur had not yet been invented. So, and they were talking about some of the same things, some of the same places, some of the same remains. And so to some extent, those are historically word synonyms, words meant to talk about the same kinds of creatures. Now, in the modern era, dinosaur has been refined beyond that to specifically be talking about land-dwelling giant reptiles. Now, in the past, in the 1800s and the 1900s, that was not the case. That included the sea and flying ones. So there will be, depending on when you grew up and what book you're reading, a bit of a confusion of terminology, whether it's dragon, dinosaur, or special dinosaur. And so for our purposes, I think using them as synonyms in most cases is probably going to be the easiest. And that is, of course, because anyone writing in the past could not, in the past before the 1800s, could not have written about dinosaurs using that word because the word didn't exist.
Yeah.
So also, of course, you've got some pretty obvious, what's the word I'm looking for here? Evidences of humans. Let's look at some visuals. Let me see if I can do this. So if I click on this and I click share screen.
Yeah, then I
go
am
over
able to pull it up.
Yeah. So let's.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's. So here, just on Google, are a few results. These are real ones. I think I've gone to one or two of these in person, but you'll see these creatures. Make sure it's sharing the right one. Yeah, let's see if we can zoom in. I want to open the image in a new tab. And then we're going to want to switch to, oh yeah, you've got it zoomed in well enough, I think. So look at that creature with those spines on its back. What is that? Because
that could definitely be a dragon.
Yeah.
It could definitely be. I mean, we've seen them in popular media with the spines and the horns and everything.
Yeah. And this is a cave painting, and it's right next to a couple snakes. You see them underneath it?
But that's also implying that some early evolution of man and dinosaurs lived around the same time. But
but not just early. Look here. What is this?
That's a boat.
Yes, that is a boat.
But
so these are people who can build things, not just art, but technology.
So at the very latest, I think, or at the very earliest, that would be like at the very least Neanderthal, because I do believe that they already like had the knowledge and skill to build boats and sail and all.
If you buy into that theory, if however you believe stories like Beowulf, you won't think Neanderthals are ancient at all. Because they're described in Beowulf as antagonists, including the protruding foreheads and the hair all over their bodies.
Oh, that is quite recent, actually.
That is quite recent, almost as if they were contemporaries of modern humans, because they were. I mean, that's what the evidence says. I mean, even modern evolutionists say that. I don't agree with their theories about the origin of life or about the age of the world, but they concede that it appears that Neanderthals intermarried with modern humans, and essentially, and that today they still have living offspring. That they were not in fact a separate species in the traditional sense. The traditional sense being separate species cannot interbreed and produce viable offspring.
Yeah, like tigers and lions and donkeys and horses, and
right.
Like they can create offspring, but that offspring can't create themselves. Yeah,
exactly. And so, in that traditional sense, we are the exact same species, and they agree actually. Which is quite odd. So, but that's one of those dinosaurs. Here's another petroglyph. I believe this one, let me find it down here, is...
Okay, we know those. The long neck dinosaurs. I believe those are my daughter's favorite dinosaur. She loves those neck dinosaurs.
Yeah, so these are not. So these are things people were drawing, but not just drawing. Let's look at something a little more advanced. So I need to quick switch screen sharing, and we got to get to this one, and we're going to go here. Share.
But if they were drawing them, that would imply that they were seeing them.
Oh yes, but that's not the most impressive one. Have a look at this.
Okay.
What creature is that?
That's a Stegosaurus.
Yeah, that's on a temple in India.
What we know to be a Stegosaurus. That's on a temple.
That's on a temple in India, along with a bunch of other completely real animals.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, it is at, let me see if I can get it here, Ta Prom, TA space PROHM. Now, I've seen live video of this being filmed.
In Cambodia. Right. Okay. But that's...
No, that one, yeah, no, this one's Cambodia. Sorry, there's another one in India. Yeah, this is the Cambodian one. But these things are all over the place. You won't just find them here. You'll also find them in stylized, and it's hard to find real versus fake ones, which is why I didn't pull them up. But if you're bored later and you want to sort through them, look up.
Okay, but according to the text that is on screen, this was like the temple at least was built in the late 1100s.
Yeah.
That's well, in here in Europe, we would recognize that as like quite literally like smack dab in the middle of the Middle Ages.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But like that's like pretty much modern-ish time already.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Modern languages were beginning to take shape in this period. Yeah. Or depending on the country you were in, had already taken shape. Mm-hmm. So those are some examples, but you can also find ones from China. There's a bunch. The problem is there's also a bunch of knockoffs. So finding a picture of a legit one is hard. But there were
Chinese knockoffs? No way.
Yeah. Of their own stuff in this case. But of dragons pulling the emperor's chariot. Specifically, the Yellow Emperor was the one originally credited with having trained dragons pulling his chariot. Interestingly, he was also credited with having a trained elephant pull his chariot. You'll notice how that's a real creature that really can do that.
Yeah. Dragon is in the Chinese zodiac as well.
Yeah. So the Chinese dragon, like so let's assume dragon means dinosaur. I think that's a fair assessment in terms of historical nomenclature.
Yeah.
If it does, why don't we read Marco Polo's description of Chinese dragons? Because he wrote one. Here there are found snakes and huge serpents, 10 paces in length and 10 spans in girth. Translated, that's about 50 feet long, 100 inches around. At the forepart, near the head, they have 2 short legs, each with 3 claws, as well as eyes larger than a loaf and very glaring. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are large and sharp. Their whole appearance is so formidable that neither man nor any kind of animal can approach them without terror. Others are of smaller size, being 8, 6, or 5 paces long. He then continues this by explaining how the local citizens hunt and kill the creatures, and how the creatures, and he describes their habits.
Mm-hmm.
That in the heat of the day, they dwell in caverns, and then at night, they head out to water sources like lakes and springs and bathe in them. And the tracks from their caves to the springs left deep depressions in the earth, like a heavy beam being drawn along the sand. And since they followed these paths regularly, one of the ways people would kill them is pit traps with spikes.
Yeah.
So Marco Polo is describing a actual creature like that people were hunting and keeping in some cases as pets, the little ones.
Yeah, which very much like reminds me of this being like a Chinese dragon,
including the large eyes. Interestingly,
yeah. The 2 long fronts, very long, very girthy. Yeah,
and as Firefay pointed out the last time we met, she showed a picture of a recently discovered body of such a creature that they had found in China. I don't know if you recall that or not.
Oh, no. No, actually, I don't, but that sounds like something she'd bring up. I mean, it's a shame she had to go to work. I would love to have her on here. But
yeah, well, it had been a recent discovery. Like I wasn't even aware of it. They just mentioned it like it had been discovered like in the last month or something when she had looked at it. But creature, the body of a creature that looks suspiciously like the Chinese dragon. So are these real creatures? I mean, anymore? Probably not. They're probably dead, if for no other reason than the modern world is very interconnected, and if large populations of these creatures were still alive, we would know. However, a few could linger in isolated places. That's possible. And more interestingly, every ancient culture has stories, broadly speaking, about 3 things: dragons, giants, and a global flood.
yeah.
And the dragon stories tend to be pretty heavily focused on dragon slaying.
Yeah. But if they lived in caves, like we know some of the cave systems are massive, like go
Oh, yeah.
very, very deep into mountain regions and underneath the ground and all. So like I'm thinking I've like talked about this with Josh, Thane Josh, on the like the shows on giants that we did, because they're set to live in caves as well. Something about caves. It seems to be a very popular place to live for giant creatures, really. So who's to say that in some cave systems, like way deep into in the mountains, or even if we go by, or if we say there's some measure to the hollow earth theory, who's to say they don't live in those cave systems still, or
Well,
in
these
the hollow
specific
earth?
creatures, right? They go there nocturnally in the caves, but the day or during the day. Sorry, I got it backwards. During
Yeah.
the day, they go in the caves, but at night they go out into the rivers and lakes and streams and such. They have a certain pattern, and Marco Polo's explanation for this was he essentially thought it was because of the heat. That the reason they were going into the caves was because it was too hot for them, which makes sense if you're the
I mean,
right.
if they're like related to, well, lizards, they like lizards, snakes, reptiles, they would be cold-blooded creatures. So, and especially with a giant body as they have, I can imagine they would overheat quickly.
Well, even if they were warm-blooded and just weren't great at cooling themselves because they normally would be in water or in caves, then just like sitting around on the land in noonday sun probably just wasn't their cup of tea.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But he's not the only one who describes them this way. So this is Marco Polo in Asia, right? Specifically interacting with the Chinese. Let's read an older source. So the Bagradas dragon is probably the next best. Let me see if I get a... Yeah. So there are 3 different versions, I believe, of this story. So let me read them to you. They're all pretty short. All of them are allegedly by eyewitnesses. And this was from an incident in... it was during the Punic Wars. So we're talking 256, 257, 255 BC.
BC. Okay.
BC. So this is wars between Carthage and Rome.
Yeah.
And the Romans fighting the Carthaginians in Africa, they were assailed by a large creature. So this is a fragment of one. This is a fragmentary source, the first one. This is Tubero. The consul Attilius Regulus, when encamped at the Bagradas River in Africa, fought a stubborn and fierce battle with a single serpent of extraordinary size, which had its lair in that region. That in a might struggle with the entire army, the reptile was attacked for a long time with hurling engines and catapults, and that when it was finally killed, its skin, 120 feet long, was sent to Rome. Now that's the briefest version. Now, the next one is based on the Latin text available in Perseus. The serpent of the Bagradas River in Africa was of such a size that it denied the army of Regulus access to the river. Many soldiers it seized in its enormous mouth and crushed to death, not a few of them with its whirling tail. It could not be penetrated by the missiles thrown at it. Finally, they attacked it with many stones launched from ballista on every side. It was brought down by the weighty blows. And now we have the actually fairly intact version by Valerius Maximus. or that's who it was preserved by. And the other version notes are Orosius, and they may be referencing Livy as well. Regulus, chosen by lot for the Carthaginian war, marched with his army to a point not far from the Bagrada River, and there pitched his camp. In that place, a reptile of astonishing size devoured many of the soldiers as they went down to the river to get water. Regulus sent out his army to attack the reptile. Neither the javelins they hurled nor the darts they rained upon its back had any effect. These glided off its horribly scaly fins as if from a slanting testudo of shields, and were in some miraculous fashion turned away from its body so that the creature suffered no injury. Now, this description is important, and we'll get back to that when we read one of the others.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I just noticed, and that's like also in the mythological stories, that there is a pattern of their scales being like unpenetrable or nearly unpenetrable.
Yeah, and we're actually going to read one from almost 2,000 years before this that describes the scales in the same way.
Oh, please do.
But we should continue this one.
Okay.
Finally, when Regulus saw that it was killing a great number of his soldiers with its bites, was trampling them down by its charge, and driving them mad by its poisonous breath. Note there's some extra details here. He ordered ballistae be brought up. A stone taken from a wall was hurled by a ballista. This struck the spine of the serpent and caused its entire body to become numb. The formation of the reptile was such that though it seemed to lack feet, yet it had ribs and scales graded evenly, extending from the top of its throat to the lowest part of its belly, and so arranged that the creature rested upon its scales as if on claws, and upon ribs as if on legs. But it did not move like the worm, which has a flexible spine and moves by first stretching its contracted parts in the direction of its tiny body and then drawing together the stretched parts. This reptile made its way by a sinuous movement, extending its sides first right and then left so that it might keep the line of ribs rigid along the exterior arch of the spine. Nature fastened the claws of its scales to its ribs. Notice the phrasing there, fastened the claws of its scales to its ribs, which extended straight to their highest point, making these moves alternately and quickly. It not only glided over levels, but also mounted inclines, taking as many footsteps, so to speak, as it had ribs. That is why the stone rendered the creature powerless. If struck by a blow in any part of the body, from its bowels to its head, it is crippled and unable to move, because wherever the blow falls, it numbs the spine, which stimulates the feet of the ribs and the motion of the body. Hence this serpent, which had for a long time withstood so many javelins unharmed, moved about disabled from the blow of a single stone, and quickly overcome by spears was easily destroyed. Its skin was brought to Rome. It is said to have been 120 feet in length, and for some time was an object of wonder to all.
So moved very rigidly. I mean, yeah, the right to left. Yeah, that sounds kind of like the movement that we see of like the four-legged dragons, the one that we know from most European.
Well, this is different, remember, because this one doesn't have like big limbs. It sounds like it's got claws, perhaps, attached to its body, and that's it. It's otherwise serpentine in shape, the way they're describing it, which is like the Chinese dragon.
Yeah.
It is also like a snake, except for the rigidness and the like spikes or claws attached to the ribs. So this is a kind of creature that I would suggest is probably the same kind of creature, or a very similar one, to the ones that the Chinese were encountering regularly. And this was, of course, a surprise for the Romans.
Yeah.
And so we have this account.
Breath.
Yeah, it's poisonous breath.
Yeah, poisonous breath.
Yeah.
I mean, they have been they're said to be fire breathers, and I do imagine that whatever um, causes or like whatever substance is lighting, I guess, would definitely be very very poisonous. Or like
Also,
if we're talking like just purely the substance itself.
also, there's no reason to think that you couldn't have a poison spitting snake or reptile.
I mean, we know of the funny Komodo dragon.
Yeah,
They are
it's bites really
and they but their saliva is incredibly poisonous, and one bite, I mean, it would definitely kill a grown man in no time.
And I've seen one kill a goat.
Oh yeah, I mean there are videos of that all over the internet.
I meant in person, but yeah,
in person.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah,
okay.
there was a zoo in Florida that had some captive, and they fed it a live goat, and came and ate it.
Oh sure, great entertainment.
The goat was understandably a bit upset.
Ah, well, surprisingly so. It's almost like it didn't want to be eaten.
Almost.
Yeah, and as I think this is an interesting comment from my Sherry, that Old Worlds Florida, another great researcher and content creator, believes that dragons have always been alligators. I mean, they're definitely large, scaly reptiles. So
yeah, so to answer a couple of those comments, Conan, yes, the Romans recorded them as actual events in more than one place. I was reading 3 different sources there. Same event, three different sources. And yes, it does sound like the motion of a sidewinder snake. As far as the alligators thing, I think it's fairly clear that these are not alligators. For one, the serpentine ones are the wrong shape. 2, they have the wrong number of claws. They have 3 or 4. Alligators have 5. Also, in the case of Marco Polo's ones, or the ones described by the Romans, they do not have the correct number of limbs for an alligator. And lastly, of course, these people knew what crocodiles and alligators were and had words for those.
Those are pretty ancient creatures as well. So, I mean, sharks, alligators, crocodiles, they're pretty ancient creatures as well.
Oh,
they've been around for millions of years as well. So, yeah, of course they would know what those are.
Well, and they were within their empire and within their trading sphere. Like the Romans were importing grain from Egypt. Egypt had a ton of crocodiles. The Romans would have known what a crocodile or alligator would look like, even if there had been none in Italy. And Italy is certainly warm enough; it could have supported a crocodile population. Over time, crocodiles and alligators have been reduced in the area that they live on the earth, but in the ancient past, they were quite widespread. So the idea that the ancients were confused about what a crocodile or alligator was is, I think, very unlikely, except perhaps for someone, for a very far north people who had never heard or seen them before, like if Eskimos saw them.
And I mean,
okay, yes.
I would imagine that, like someone from where I am, from the Netherlands or Germany or Scandinavia, like very northern Europe, even though we have, we have our stories of dragons. We have, dragons in Norse Germanic mythology, of course. But I do think we would be, for the layman's folk at least, would be kind of confused and like scared if we saw a crocodile or an alligator. I mean, I know
for sure, but you have to remember, medieval heraldry tells us they knew the difference.
Yeah,
because they drew alligators and crocodiles, and they didn't draw them the same as they drew dragons.
No, true.
So they knew the difference, and if they hadn't before, they certainly did by the Crusades, and the Vikings knew before that with their various expeditions to the Mediterranean. So, so the notion that they would have been confused, I think, is a mistake. Also, when you get to the European dragons, right, you've broadly speaking got three pretty cool ones, but they're not. Their sourcing is more difficult. So you've got Siegfried killing a dragon. The problem is we don't have an intact source of his tale. We have a bunch of partial ones that are kind of mutually contradictory. If you go to the stream I did with Raven a while back, like last year, you will find a book I recommended by J.R.R. Tolkien, where he actually, because he was a professor of language, right?
Yeah.
He actually blended those disparate accounts together and attempted to make one cohesive and as accurate as he could story of them by taking the oldest and most reliable manuscripts and leaning into those. And it's pretty good. I have a copy on my shelf over there. But yeah, and Raven's got one too. But if you are interested in reading a coherent and as accurate as we can get version of that story, that is available. But then you've got Beowulf. We've got, again, not the most, it's more reliable in the sense that we have a more intact copy or four, but it's still not very close to the period, right? It's not like a generation or even 100 years removed from the events in question. It's quite a bit later that we have this poem, right? This poetic epic. And so they both describe dragons pretty similarly, describe their behavior pretty similarly, and probably were heavily influenced by one another, among other things, because Beowulf is a Germanic story, and so is the story of Siegfried.
Yeah.
And these people were intermarrying still with one another for quite a long time, and then later raiding each other and trading. So there's a distinct possibility their stories influenced one another, especially if they were made up. And if they weren't, if these were real creatures that they killed, then you'd expect them to be describing similar creatures because they lived in similar areas, similar climates. So either way, it's not surprising that they're similar. And then you also will get some references all the way up through the 1800s about these same sort of dragons described in Beowulf and Siegfried's stories.
Through the 1800s?
Through the 1800s, describing rumors that some still survived in the Alps.
In the Alps?
Yes.
That's rather cold.
Yes. And so what changed was they had an expedition go up to the Alps who didn't see any dragons. So so the next edition of that encyclopedia started listing them as mythological.
That's too easy.
Yes.
I went there once. I didn't see them. So, therefore they don't exist.
Yep. Now, granted, I agree. They're probably dead. But that it does not mean they didn't live. And that is the claim that was then made. Well, then they never were. I don't think so. But the other reason I don't think so is, of course, and we'll get to our two best sources in a moment. But let's go to a bad source, but it's popular. George and the Dragon.
Yeah.
So, have you ever heard of St. George?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So St. George is a very popular saint, especially popular from about the 10 or 1100s on, and is insanely popular, as one might expect, in the nation of Georgia. Something like 1/3 of all of their churches and monasteries are dedicated to St. George.
That's hardly surprising.
It is a little, because even though you'd expect them to be named after him or something, they're not. They're not even vaguely related. It's just a happy coincidence of linguistics.
Okay.
But he was so we have some sources about him that are early, but those sources focus around his death. They do not focus around his conflict with this dragon. So the source that we have is from the 11th century, and it claims to be referencing older stuff, but we can't know that. And even then, it's really copies of this source from the 11th and 12th century. And it's from Georgia. So basically, Crusaders went off on the Crusades, and then over the course of their time in Canaan and the surrounding area, learned about this saint that the Georgians venerated, and then brought that back to Europe. And now he's quite popular all over the place, including, England and all, just places the man definitely didn't live.
Like I'm looking him up real quick. He was a soldier in the Roman army of Cappadocian Greek origin.
Yep.
And became a member of the Praetorian Guard. So he is definitely, up there in people who you should take seriously.
Right. So we have some old sources about that he lived and how he died, although there's a bit of basically he died hard. All of the stories of his execution, he survived the first attempt or two to kill him, so they use another thing.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So really an unpleasant and gruesome death either way. But they appear to have used several methods to finish the man off. In any case, though, it appears that he either in Cappadocia or in Libya, he encountered a local king in an area where there was a dragon, this big, and in the Roman era, they used the same word for a snake or for what we mean by a dragon.
Yeah.
So a good translation is probably a serpent, as that kind of could imply either. But there's this serpent creature that is threatening this village, and the local ruler has decreed that they will feed it to buy it off. So they start giving it a goat at first, or a sheep, and then they start giving it 2 goats or sheep.
Yeah, they gave it
bigger and hungrier, and it starts
2 sheep each day. But when the sheep were not enough, they were forced to sacrifice humans. That was in the city of I'm totally gonna butcher the name, but Cyrene in Libya.
Yeah, and then so they start by lot or by vote. The sources vary a little on this, selecting people from the village to give to the dragon, and eventually the king's daughter is selected. And it just so happens that when she's staked out, waiting to be eaten by the dragon, very classic story, by the way, as it's become since then, but that was fairly original at the time. It's a trope now, but it wasn't then.
Wow, that story has once been an original story. Damn.
Yeah. They got the virgin staked out for the dragon. And St. George happens by, he rides past, sees this lady, and is like, "Do you need help?" And she basically tells him to leave. And he doesn't. He instead gets off his horse, goes over, cuts her free, finds out what's going on, and he goes to the town. And they're all upset because, he removed the captive who they were feeding the dragon to. And he basically wants the town to, again, the sources vary a little, to either convert to Christianity or to let him preach Christianity to them if he kills the dragon. And they're like, okay. So he goes and he kills the dragon, and he brings back the corpse. It's very dramatic. Depending on the story you get, the golden legend is a very dramatic telling of this. It's not the historical one. It's a bit more embellished, but you can read about that. And anyway, he kills the thing, and then he's able to preach to them, or a number of them become Christians. And then within a few years after that, he's executed because, again, being Christian at the time was still illegal in the Roman Empire.
Yeah, he lost,
particularly for soldiers.
Yeah, and he lost his hat over it. Wouldn't be the first Christian, wouldn't be the last one, but that's
indeed. And so the oldest sources don't focus on the dragon thing, so we don't know how accurate it is. That's why I say it's one of the less reliable ones, because the oldest attested manuscript is like 800 years after his death, about the dragon thing.
Oh, okay.
About
yeah.
his actual death, it's much closer. It's a couple centuries.
Well, if they like started sacrificing livestock first, which is also will become a trope, you know, that they like that's how they figure out something's going on, because you know all the sheep and goat and whatever are disappearing. But like that wasn't enough, so they started sacrificing humans. Does that imply that they like negotiated with the dragon or something, or that the dragon
getting bigger? It was
Sorry?
getting bigger because they started right. They start with one.
Yeah.
The goat or sheep, and then they go up to 2.
Yeah.
And then they switch to humans, which I guess really implies that they didn't have a lot of available horses or cows, because a human was the next biggest thing that was available.
Oh dear. Okay.
Yeah. So, although it kind of makes sense, because they do seem to have viewed this as a kind of demonic force as well. They viewed this as like a plague they had been cursed with, right? Not just a local lion who had gotten a taste for human flesh.
Yeah, because the modern depiction of the devil seems very much dragon-like, and dragon imagery has always been sort of associated with, you know, demonic or devilish evil.
Kind of, not the earliest stuff. That's really because of the Apocalypse of John. That's really because of Revelation. In Revelation and a couple other places in the Bible, the devil is described as the ancient serpent or the great serpent. But this is a metaphor. This is not meant to be literally true. One of the ways you can tell is that the people of Israel are depicted as a single woman in the same metaphor.
Mhm.
Obviously, Israelis are not a lone woman. That's a metaphor.
I mean, at the Eurovision, perhaps, but
so the so he's described that way, but that's not how it's described. How the dragons are described when they're described as a creature in the Bible. So you brought it up. Let's look at that, and then let's look at the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, its description is more spotty because, unfortunately, that's one of the broken tablets. But what you do get is terrifying. So these are our two oldest and probably most reliable sources, in that they were written closer to the events in question, right? So in the case of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the two partial copies we have are secondhand, which is super good, actually, which is to say, people who tell you about the game telephone, and that being a metaphor for how ancient documents are passed along. That's not actually true, because what they would do is keep referring to the original as long as it lasted. So that's actually quite a big mistake. And if anyone's bored and wants to talk about textual criticism, I'd be happy to. But in this case, both of our surviving sources tell you that they are a copy made from the pillar outside of the city Gilgamesh used to rule. So what they're saying is, we copied this story from the pillar that Gilgamesh set up.
So they're copies from the original. Oh, that's, I mean, that's literally second best. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's quite good as far as sourcing goes.
Yeah.
And we have it from two groups who hated each other off and on, which is even better, because we have an Assyrian and a Babylonian source. And the Assyrians and Babylonians went to war and conquered each other repeatedly. They didn't get along super well, and enemies make excellent sourcing for ancient documents. If they agree, it's probably correct.
Yeah.
So that'll be the Gilgamesh one. But let's read the one in the Bible, because that one is probably pretty referenceable to most people. If you don't own a Bible, there are free ones. You can just go to like BibleGateway.com and read it yourself in like 30 different translations if you're bored. Um,
I
so it's
don't
very
know if
accessible.
I've ever been that bored, but
It's very accessible. So our context here is so Job has had some terrible things happen to him as part of a test, kind of his obedience and love for God, and we are deep into the story, and he is partway through. God basically saying to Job, "Who are you to question me?"
yeah.
And so that's the context we're reading in. So God has led up as the speaker and as the narrator, as it were, in this part of Job, as the guy talking. He's led up with a bunch of normal creatures, things like a stork, an ostrich, war horses trained for battle, oxen. He's talking about normal things, thunderstorms, and then we go into Job 40, verse 15. So this is one of two, I would argue, dinosaurs described in the book of Job. Look at the behemoth, which I made along with you, in which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength he has in his loins, what power in the muscles of his belly. His tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are close knit. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God, yet his maker can approach him with his sword. The hills bring him their produce, and all the wild animals play nearby. Under the lotus plants he lies, hidden among the reeds of the marsh. The lotuses conceal him in their shadow. The poplars by the stream surround him. When the river rages, he is not alarmed. He is secure, though the Jordan should surge against his mouth. Can anyone capture him by the eyes, or trap him and pierce his nose? So this is our description of the first one. So some people will try to claim this is a crocodile. Again, that's stupid, especially for these people, as as Job is written, as far as biblical timeline goes or history goes, Job is written after the people of Israel went to Egypt, but before they came back. And there are a number of ways you can tell this. Basically, the place names and the personal names tell you this information. Now, if you want, at some point, I'd be happy to get into the why. It's a bit detailed, but suffice it to say, that's when this is written. And so they definitely know what a crocodile is.
If you're in Egypt, I would hope so.
Yeah.
They're all over the place. So
yeah. So it's not that. Also, it wouldn't match it. One, this thing, if you notice, is a vegetarian. Other creatures play by it, and it eats the produce of the hills. This is not a carnivore.
Crocodiles definitely are not vegetarian. I mean, they'll eat vegetarians, but
also it eats grass like an ox. Not a crocodile. In fact, this probably most closely resembles, in my opinion, one of the larger herbivore dinosaurs, and in particular, possibly one of the long-necked ones, or because it talks about when the river rages, he's not alarmed, and he's secure, though the Jordan should surge against his mouth, which implies that when the river is flooding, it reaches his mouth.
Aren't there depictions in Egypt that those long-necked dinosaurs helped with building the pyramids? I remember something like that. I remember there are...
I'm not familiar with that one, but possibly. It wouldn't be a great shock if there were such a creature available and you could get it to help you haul stuff, you would. It would be like having an elephant help you haul stuff. That'd be awesome.
Real life Flintstones.
Yeah. But this creature, in any case, is not a living creature today. We're told where it lives, which is along the Jordan. We're told that it conceals itself among the lotuses and the poplars and the reeds of the marsh. And we're told this is a vegetarian creature. We're told also that its tail sways like a cedar. It's got a big, thick tail, right? And also that his hide is pretty impenetrable. He's hard to kill. When it describes his bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like rods of iron. And talks about the inability of people to capture him in verse 24. So this is a pretty scary creature, but he's not as scary as the next one. And this one, again, despite dwelling by the Jordan, appears to be a, loosely speaking, land creature, because, well, he dwells in the marshes. He's eating grass. So, and has a pretty wide range, because he's going from the valley of the Jordan and the marshes up to the hill country to eat and back. So he's not just hanging out in one little area in this description. So the other one here, which is chapter 41, verse 1. Can you pull in the Leviathan with a fishhook, or tie down his tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he keep begging you for mercy? Will he speak to you with gentle words? Will he make an agreement with you for you to take him as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of him like a bird, or put him on a leash for your girls? Will traders barter for him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his hide with spears, or his head with fishing spears? Hide with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on him, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing him is false. The mere sight of him is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse him. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. I will not fail to speak of his limbs, his strength, and his graceful form. Who can strip off his outer coat? Who would approach him with a bridle? Who dares open the doors of his mouth, ringed about with his fearsome teeth? His back has rows of shields, tightly sealed together. Notice that similar terminology from the earlier example.
Yeah.
Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. His snorting throws out flashes of light. His eyes are like the rays of the dawn. Firebrands stream from his mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from his nostrils, as from a boiling pot over a fire of reeds. His breath sets coals ablaze, and flames dart from his mouth. Strength resides in his neck. Dismay goes before him. The folds of his flesh are tightly joined. They are firm and immovable. His chest is hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. When he rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before his thrashing. The sword that reaches him has no effect, nor does the spear, the dart, or the javelin. Iron he treats like straw, and bronze like a rotten wood. Arrows do not make him flee. Slingstones are like chaff to him. A club seems to him but a piece of straw. He laughs at the rattling of the lance. His undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. He makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron, and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him, he leaves a glistening wake. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is his equal, a creature without fear. He looks down on all that are haughty. He is king over all that are proud. That's the description of the second one.
That definitely sounds like a dragon. I mean,
yeah.
And also the sounds very like the African dragon with it leaving trenches.
Yeah.
You know, with the claws and all.
Yeah.
So, and you know, if that's in Egypt, that definitely would make sense. Scales very tight together, you know, fearsome.
Yeah, and so Job would have been living in the land of Seir or Edom. This is foothills in modern day Israel or Jordan, and so that's the region he's living in. So in the one case, when we're talking about the behemoth who lives in the Jordan River Valley, it's pretty obvious Job could have seen that creature. Also, the entire point of the argument that God is making to Job in this book is I created everything, including you, and you as a human are evil. Who are you to question me? I can do anything I want with you. I'm right to do so. I made everything. Look at these creatures that I've made. You can't even control them. You can't even control the weather, or you can't even control the sunrise. Who are you to question me? That's the general kind of context here of this text, where we've got a whole bunch of chapters of that. I think it's about 5 chapters of this kind of dialogue. And then Job, of course, goes, oh no, and repents. He's like, yeah, I was wrong.
I mean, if you're threatened by, or with a dragon, even, like, like, look at that. If I can do that, if I can create such a creature, like, just imagine what I can do to you as merely human.
Well, even just like, who are you as a human on this little blue speck? Who are you to question the creator of the universe? Is kind of the general tone.
Yeah, like, I mean, I would definitely feel insulted. Yeah, it's like, dude, no, just go play.
And so, and what's really interesting is that, like, the lead into the book, God is boasting essentially about Job, not in like the evil sense, but he's saying how exemplary Job's obedience to him is, right? And the whole setup to the book of Job is Satan challenging God and going, well, he only obeys you because you give him all these rewards. If you take all that good stuff away, he'll curse you. And so the book of Job is really about this kind of test that Job undergoes, where all of his wealth is taken away. His children die in a terrible like house collapse event. His wife basically betrays him and tells him to kill himself. Like, it's pretty bad. He gets incredibly ill. And then he has friends come to try to comfort him with terrible advice. And then, and that's like the bulk of the book is them talking with him. Like it's like 30 chapters of his friends talking with him. And then Job starts talking, and then God addresses Job directly. And then near the end of that is where we read these 2 descriptions of dragons or dinosaurs. And then Job repents. He's restored. He has even more children than he had before. He has even more wealth than he had before. It doesn't say it, but I strongly suspect he had a new wife, and so forth. And his friends also repent of their foolishness, and Job like intercedes with God for them, and so on. But that's the general like context of what we're looking at here. And so these are meant to be examples to Job, like all the ones leading into it, of things he had seen and understood he couldn't control, that he had no power over.
Yeah. Wow. So, but like that's a description of a dinosaur or a dragon. Like, you can't make it any more clear unless you like literally write, this is a dragon. But,
yeah. And it makes it kind of idiot proofs it as far as, does this thing breathe fire? Because it says it 8 different ways. Yes, it definitely breathes fire.
Yeah. I mean, with its breathing, with like everything really that he does. Like, he spits fire. Yeah, he breathes fire.
Like, holds ablaze with his breath. Like,
yeah, I mean, you can't really get it any more clearer than that.
Yeah, and what's really cool is it's in kind of the context of poetry, right?
Yeah.
The way it's being described is very poetic, while at the same time being very clear. What is this thing like?
Yeah, very, very frightening, but very poetic.
Yeah.
And on the topic of breathing fire, what we all know the dragons to do. I do wonder how, how can they do that? And is it because there would be some kind of chemical process, but at the same time, there has to be a source of ignition. So, how do you do that?
I don't think you have a problem. Have you ever heard of the bombardier beetle?
No, can't
Look it
say.
up. Pull up a YouTube video a sec. Now we obviously can't stream it, but you'll be able to look at it anyway.
I have no idea if I'm spelling it correctly. How do I bombardier beetle? Okay.
Okay. So the bombardier beetle. Let me try and get that pulled up so I can look at it with you. The bombardier beetle is shoots out fire and smoke from its ass.
Oh, yeah.
In reality, this is a creature you can see today.
So hot, it's the temperature of boiling water. That's wow. That's
a little beetle.
I mean, I know of what are they, revolver shrimp or whatever, that the ones who shoot out a incredibly hot bubble as well.
Mm-hmm. So this is a thing that already exists in nature to a lesser degree that we know about. So it shouldn't shock us if it could exist on a larger scale or at a slightly higher temperature. In particular, for the bombardier beetle, it's basically its digestive process gets it a couple of different chemicals that it mixes together to create an explosive reaction in a special chamber in its body. It is not hard to see how you could do something like that in a living creature. This is essentially, by the way, how rockets work. They've got two chambers with the components of the fuel that then get mixed to burn. That's how rockets often are designed. And so this process already exists in the bombardier beetle. Why couldn't it exist in a large reptile?
It's a chemical process.
Yeah. And based off in part what they're eating. And so their body splits off the necessary things to do that, the necessary chemicals.
Oh, that's fascinating. So then of course a very large creature with a very large appetite. If it really just one sheep, okay, two sheep, starting to get a little slim. You can say it has a big appetite. Then that would definitely be able to, destroy entire villages with its fiery breath.
Well, and the one that Regulus and his men are fighting, right? That's killing a bunch of his men, so much so that he brings out artillery for his day and age. He brings out ballista to hurl stones at it. Those had teams of operators. This was a significant response. He was responding with probably more than a century of men, which means he thought this was a big threat and had lost, according to each of those accounts, numerous soldiers.
I mean, they'd be toast pretty damn fast.
Right. Well, this thing, if it's eating them, right? Think about the calorie and just the chemical intake by eating a bunch of humans. Even if you needed rare elements, they're in people. You just need to eat enough.
And definitely, if they were soldiers, and its its stomach would be strong enough, and its stomach acid or whatever would be strong enough to digest metals such as iron or or bronze,
Mhm.
That would definitely supply you with a good amount if you're eating, entire legions. Um, yeah.
And also, incidentally, stomach issues could explain the toxic breath described, or the poisonous breath described, with the one that the Romans were fighting. If you had an upset stomach and you barfed out stomach acid, what would that do to the person you hit if you had acid capable of burning through iron?
Oh, that'd be nasty. That would definitely do some damage. Like I know that my father has like acid issues or acid reflux pretty regularly. Unfortunately, that's, well, lifestyle choice and stress and all. But like it kills his voice. He loses
Oh yeah,
his voice because it just gets like pretty much burned away. Um, so yeah, if like imagine if you were to, well, it's kind of gross, but like vomit, um,
yeah.
like giant amounts or huge amounts onto people or onto something, would that would definitely burn it away. It'd be like a very chemical burn, but still it'd be a burn.
Yeah, yeah, because the one that the Romans are fighting isn't described as fire breathing; it's described as being like toxic or poisonous. Or,
Yeah, just
but I, yeah,
very chemical in nature. Yeah.
yeah, and I would say, on the whole, if we believe, and I certainly do, that dragons were dinosaurs, then
Mhm.
obviously you're going to have varying types, as there were varying types of dinosaurs.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, we know of different types of dragons. You have the wyvern, of course, the European dragons, either with two legs or two limbs or four limbs.
yep.
I believe you also have. I believe that's more Japanese though. Like they have no limbs at all. They're basically just flying serpents.
They're kind of knockoff Chinese dragons, really.
Yeah, yeah, Chinese, Japanese,
Well,
Jordanies.
and to be fair, the language also, like the characters and stuff, the Japanese are definitely a originally descendant civilization of Chinese. Like they're
Yeah,
a splinter group.
I mean, don't
Original.
tell the Japanese; they'll not like it. But no,
Well,
it's
sometimes reality
it's
isn't
true.
pretty.
Yeah,
Obviously, it's a culture with a long and proud tradition since then, but originally, no, it's
yeah,
a Chinese splinter group.
yeah, and yeah, like the like stomach acid issues. Like as Josh said, that's the whole reason he's
Hmm.
not co-hosting at the
Oh,
moment,
that sucks, man.
and it's just in the live chat. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah,
So
but
scale, right? So the Epic of Gilgamesh, which we touched on briefly,
yeah,
um, the basic story of not the whole epic. The whole epic's really cool. It as a Christian, it actually helps reinforce the historical account in Genesis, for example, the
hmm
global flood, because a really old dude tells Gilgamesh the story of the flood almost word for word the same way it is in the Bible. But you have to remember, this is an Assyrian and Babylonian source copying Sumerian writing. This isn't, they're not sourcing it from the book of Genesis at all, which is pretty cool, including details like like releasing the ravens and the doves and this kind of thing at the end.
yeah,
It's very, and the old man telling Gilgamesh this is says he was on the ark. He's telling them that he's one of the survivors, which is cool. But there's a bunch of stuff like that. Gilgamesh also is a what's the word I'm looking for? Ridiculously evil king, cartoonishly evil almost, and kind of acknowledges it by the time he carves his pillar.
Okay, I mean, at least he's self-aware.
Yeah, and slightly penitent, maybe. So
Right.
basically, Gilgamesh would forcibly sleep with women on the first night of their wedding in his city. That's the nicest way I can phrase it.
Okay, yeah. So he gets dips, basically.
And this was not a popular thing with the people of his city for obvious reasons.
Well, no, oh wow, you don't say. Really?
Indeed.
You're like the king forces himself on your bride, and you can't do anything about it. I mean, I can
Not just
imagine that
politically,
pisses off some people.
but physically. He's described as so big, like in like he's not fat, but he's so tall and muscular and stuff. He can't get through the doors of normal people's houses without like crouching to get in or crawling to get in. Like this is a big, giant, muscular dude who none of the warriors can defeat.
Oh yeah, so good luck stopping him. Yeah.
Right. So they come up with a plan. Now Gilgamesh puts a fun spin on this in his account, but basically the town decides they know about another giant strong dude. The town decides to get the town hooker to go out by a watering hole and wait for this guy, because they know there's this wild guy who lives with the animals and keeps releasing them from their trappers' traps. Like he's friendly to the animals, and but they know he lives out there, so they send the town hooker with bread and beer to try to lure this guy into the city. He meets her, sleeps with her, and like right after that has bread and beer, and he is hooked. He marries that lady. The giant living out in the wild is immediately hooked on civilization as the hooker teaches him all about the ways of the city. And he marries her and goes back to the city, and Gilgamesh goes to do what he usually does.
Okay.
And gets in a fight with the other big guy. And then they become friends, as one does.
That probably sounds like two men, like two burly guys, beating each other up, and after that just having a beer and becoming friends after.
Yeah. And Gilgamesh stops his rather nasty habit because of his new friend.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah. And so the people kind of kill two birds with one stone. The giant dude out in the woods is no longer releasing animals from the traps, and their king is no longer doing things he shouldn't.
Oh, win-win.
Yeah, win-win. So the two become best friends, and essentially, this guy, Enkidu or something like that. Let me get his name right here. Enkidu. This guy Enkidu becomes his best friend, and they go on a series of adventures together throughout most of the epic. One of these adventures is because Enkidu now lives in the city. They decide they want to rebuild the city gates. So they want to get some big, strong timber to build new city gates. Yeah. And so they want to travel to Lebanon to get cedar wood, big, giant cedar trees, to haul back to make new gates. The problem is, now this is really interesting, it helps you set the period. People don't live there yet.
Wow, okay.
So the trees are there, but people don't live there yet. And whenever logging expeditions go into the area, they get attacked by this monster. And so some of the people survive the attempt, otherwise no one would know what happened, of course. But essentially, whenever the noise of the cutting down of trees happens, the monster will come after them. Not always instantly, but within a few hours.
Yeah.
So this is a fairly fast-moving giant creature that hates loggers for whatever reason.
Like a guardian of the woods kind of thing.
Yeah. And so Enkidu and Gilgamesh tell the elders of the city they're going to do this. The city forges new weapons for them to go and hunt this monster. And they go and they with a team of guys, and they're going to go cut the lumber and lure this thing in and try to kill it with their brand new, freshly sharpened weapons. Right.
Good luck with that.
So this is deliberate dragon slaying. And this is a very old story. We're talking, for those of you familiar with the biblical timeline, Gilgamesh would be around alive at the same time as Abraham. There's a couple ways to know that. One of which is the people he interacts with are involved in a war that Abraham also fights in. So they're contemporaries. So this is a long time ago. We're talking probably more than 4,000 years from the present.
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, at least some of the some of the poems date back to the third dynasty of Ur, which would be 2100s BC.
That or a little earlier.
Yeah, so like a good 4,500 years ago, current timeline.
Right. So this is quite an old story about dragon slaying.
Yeah.
And again, we have copies of the original, which is just insane. Now, they're both damaged. Both sets of copies are damaged. This is kind of the nature of much of cuneiform writing. They were making it usually on clay tablets that they baked. And then, clay doesn't do so good if you hit it with something blunt. Or drop it.
No, unfortunately not. It's quite brittle.
Yeah. Does real good in fire, though. Gets harder, actually.
Yeah, no, that it does.
So, as a result, we've got these two partial copies, and by cross-referencing them, that's how I have the translation I've got in front of me. So basically, here's after a gap of 32 missing lines. It picks up. In order to protect the cedar forest, Enlil assigned Humbaba. Now, Enlil is one of the gods of the city of I think it's Uruk, the city that Gilgamesh rules. Anyway, it's one of their pantheon of deities, right?
Yeah.
So, in order to protect the cedar forest, Enlil assigned Humbaba as a terror to human beings. Humbaba's roar is a flood, his mouth is fire, and his breath is death. He can hear 100 leagues away any rustling in his forest. Who would go down into his forest? Enlil assigned him as a terror to human beings. Whoever goes down into his forest, and then we have a break in the tablet. It might mean gets paralyzed, and then will be struck.
Okay.
And then we have another break in the tablet. And then it's basically the two guys encouraging each other to be brave, as the bros will do.
Of course.
And they talk about their plan to make so. Come, my friend, I will go over to the forge and have them cast weapons in our presence. One thing this tells us is that they're using bronze. You don't cast iron.
No,
definitely. Weapons anyway.
No.
And they talk about the weight of them. We should fashion the axe in such a way. The hatchet should be 1 talent in weight. The sword should be 1 talent. Their armor, so they talk about they're building special armor as well for this event. And making themselves mighty and so on. And so they're talking about this creature. So this creature already is described in a similar way to the ones we've read about, where it's terrifying, and it breathes fire, and it will kill you with its breath.
That definitely sounds like the dragon that we know.
Yeah. And then they have basically here we go. So here's a fragmentary bit. Enkidu spoke to Gilgamesh. So now Gilgamesh is the one panicking. So Enkidu's the speaker. Why, my friend, are you whining so pitiably, hiding behind your whimpering? Now there, my friend, break in the text. In the coppersmith's channel, another break in the text. Again, to blow the bellows for an hour, the glowing metal, break in the text for an hour. to set the flood, to crack the whip. Do not snatch your feet away. Do not turn back. Strike even harder. And then we have some more fragments. The ground split open with the heels of their feet as they whirled around in circles. A Mount Hermon and Lebanon split. So we're talking about either dramatic stuff or an actual earthquake or the shaking of the ground. The white clouds darkened. Death rained down on them like fog. Shamash raised up against Humbaba mighty tempests. So now they're talking about a storm is happening during their fight, this extended fight going for more than an hour against the dragon. And then there's these great winds, and the winds are kind of blowing from all directions. They describe it as south wind, north wind, east wind, west wind, whistling wind, piercing wind, and then a whole bunch of additional words. They're describing a major storm, including things like the word for blizzard, the word for ice wind, so forth.
In the Levant, in Lebanon?
Now, this would have been more normal anyway, because you have to remember our oldest sources, and indeed our scientists will agree that in the past, the Levant used to be much cooler. Our oldest sources talk about ice and snow being on mountaintops year-round that no longer have snow at all.
Oh, okay. Oh. Okay. Yeah. So, well, yeah, that would make sense. Then I was like, thinking more modern times. Yeah.
But this was also true, like for North Africa, where North Africa is now mostly desert. In the not too distant past, probably in the last 4,000 or 5,000 years, North Africa was quite fertile and had a lot of rivers and lush vegetation.
Yeah.
So the environment has definitely changed. And, this may not shock you. It wasn't coal and it wasn't aerosol cans that did
it. Wow, really?
Jeez. Shockingly, yes, because that happened beforehand.
It was cow farts, right?
No, not cow farts either. It's almost as if humans don't control the environment, and that the environment does change, typically suddenly.
Hey, now you can say that. Come on.
Oh, sure, I can. And for reasons beyond our control. For example, there was a time when more than once, when volcanoes went off in Iceland, blanketing the northern hemisphere in a darker cloud, dimming the sun in some cases for years, and causing freezing temperatures, so much so that Boston Harbor today froze solid. That is an open harbor.
Quite recently, actually, like a major volcano bursting in Iceland, causing all kinds of trouble.
Oh yeah, but this is much more. But that's thus far much more minor than the one in the Middle Ages and the one in the Dark Ages. One of which, and also the Little Ice Age a bit later. But the one in the Dark Ages caused like starvation and death for about half a decade.
Ooh.
Because of the failed crops and the limited light.
Oh, right. Yeah, I believe I've heard that, read that story recently. Yeah.
Yeah. So major environmental shifts are not generally dependent on humans, just so you all know. They happened a bunch in the past. So they describe this storm forming and like some kind of earthquake or shaking of the ground. They're yelling encouragement to each other. And then basically, because this is kind of a poem, here we go. Let's see. They basically trap the monster, Humbaba, and in the story, it like begs them for its life, and then they kill it.
As you do, of course.
Yeah, which I think obviously the quotation of what it says is just completely made up. However, an animal whining and begging for its life is very much in character with the real behavior of animals.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you could, of course, translate that into, the animal actually, begging for its life, asking not to be killed, because that's what it's doing.
Yeah. And then they talk about what they cut down, they talk about cutting down cedars whose top scrapes the sky, making it from it a door 72 cubits high and 24 cubits wide. And then they talk about some more stuff. So put another way, what they're talking about is taking down a cedar the size of, let me think, cubits to inches, about 100 feet tall.
That's a decent sized tree.
Yeah, a little more on the upper end, depending on which cubit they're using. A cubit is basically 18 to 22, 24 inches on the outside, but usually about 18 or 20 inches. So you're talking 100, 125 feet in height. And they're making this thing also 36 feet wide. Obviously, if you plane it, if you split it in half and so on, you can make it a bit wider. But I've seen trees like this. They grow today in California. The redwood forests.
I looked up the conversion units real quick. If we're talking Egyptian cubits, which I think would be closest, then 1 cubit rounded up would be about 18 inches. It's like 17.7 something.
Yeah, that's why I said the cubits do vary. Like the Egyptian royal cubit is a specific length. But given the period, the Egyptian royal cubit probably did not yet exist.
No.
But Egypt did, but they didn't have the standardized measurement they later established.
Yeah.
And the older cubits, to the best of my understanding, tended to be larger. So 18 inches is the conservative end.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did convert to Egyptian cubits, not the royal Egyptian cubits. So this should be fairly accurate.
Yeah, but you have to remember that the cubit is, loosely speaking, this to here. You're talking about that length. And depending on the civilization, it did vary a bit. And in the same way as inches in real life can be estimated from like the digit here on your finger.
Yeah.
That's about an inch typically for a human. The different civilizations based on their average height or arm length there was a ballpark range, but some of them standardized it at very specific distances and then had measurement rods that you would compare it to, just like we would today with rulers or tape measures.
Yeah.
The Egyptians were one of them who actually.
Those are some big trees and some big dudes felling them.
Yeah, and so they haul this thing back and they build the gate for the city and stuff. But what's really cool is that this description of the tree matches real redwoods today. There are real redwoods that are even bigger than that still exist today. Yeah. They're no longer in Lebanon. Lebanon got clear cut over the course of a few thousand years of boat making and palace making. And exporting of timber. But at one time, it had a forest very like that in California.
Oh, wow. So, and then for a creature to live there and notice it when you're cutting down one of those trees.
Yeah.
That had to have been some creature. It had to be fairly large. I mean, they're fairly large trees, just cutting them, who's gonna notice such a and this is a tree, one swing of the axe, it's nothing.
Yeah, and this is a giant creature. You can tell partly because the ground's shaking, and you can tell partly because of the speed. Generally speaking, I know there are a few exceptions, but generally speaking, you do not have a creature that can sustain speed over long distances and is small. Cheetahs are relatively small, and they can't sustain speed over long distances. They're quick, short distance.
Yeah,
but this thing in the story can hear you 100 leagues away and will come running at you. Like it's gonna come and get you, even from like the other side of the forest. So it has excellent hearing, but also it can sustain speed or sustain travel for a long period, and thus is probably quite large, not just because the ground shakes when they fight it, but also because of the distances that they're talking about.
I mean, if it's that fast, it like one stride would have to be a significant distance already.
Well, yeah, even something like a T-Rex or a Triceratops or something, you're talking about the stride at least the length of an elephant and probably more.
Yeah.
You know,
and then like such a beast coming like running at you. No thanks, I'm out.
Not these two. They were like, no, that's the plan.
Yeah, but you know they were a bit bigger than I am. So, you know, I'm just your average 6 foot European, not some freaking giant living in the Levant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is pretty good evidence, again, for giants, which I'd love to do on another occasion with you,
Sure.
including some physical artifacts, which are otherwise very difficult to explain.
I mean, I've done 3 shows, I believe, on giants. With Josh on one of them, we invited Andy from Deepshire, and I have something planned for September for a show like that, but I'm keeping that to myself for now. But
Well, in the event that that we can make it work, mid-September is when I'd be available. The tail ends of both, I've got conventions I'm at. The beginning of September and the end week.
Oh, that'd actually be pretty good timing. That would line up pretty good. Yeah, I'll have to check the schedule, but it will be too. Yeah, we can definitely do that. I would definitely love to.
Yeah, and the big thing with this, right, is to talk eyewitness accounts, physical evidence, reliability of sources, and this is true for the dragons as well. It's what we talked about that a little bit. So in the case of the Roman one, right, you've got 3 different sources, all of which claim to be from eyewitnesses, 2 of which are more partial than the other. Like I mean, they're fragmentary or missing part of the story. And then you've also got in all 3 accounts, there's this 120-foot long skin that was put on display
120 foot
for years after the fact. So they
So
definitely killed something.
So where did that go? Where did that skin go?
Well, you had Roman civil wars and then the sacking of the city in the 300s, late 300s, I want to say. So even if it had lasted till then, and by then it would have been over 500 years old, or about 500 years old at that point, it would have been seized or burned. But this wasn't the only such incident. There were several dragons in the Middle Ages alleged to have been killed in modern day England and Wales. And in several instances, the carcass, specifically the skin usually, or sometimes maybe the bones, would be put on display like at the local church. And you have to remember, during the period, the role of the local church was the community center, among other things. It wasn't just a religious establishment. This is the place everyone would go for news. It's why, for example, Martin Luther in the Reformation hung his theses on the door of the church, because everyone would see it. And so in several of these incidents, you had long-term evidentiary display of the killing that was publicly available. And so it's really difficult to claim reasonably that all these stories, and we just covered a few, 6 or 7 of them. I think it's unreasonable to claim that these literally hundreds of accounts are all fictitious or imaginary. I think it is far more believable that our ancestors in the not so distant past finished off the dinosaurs. There are reasons to believe that dinosaurs over time became less of a threat to humans physically.
Yeah.
One of the reasons for this is that for every giant species of dinosaur, you have a miniature version. Pretty literally all of them. So, for example, there's a T-Rex that gets like 40 feet tall that we've got great evidence for, and started at about 12 inches tall in an egg. Great. But then we have specimens that appear to have reached full adulthood at 12 feet tall. Why? I mean, it could be that there was less food available, but scientists classify them as a separate species. Obviously, we don't have their DNA, certainly not their intact DNA.
Yeah.
And we have no idea whether or not they were really a different species, or whether they were just smaller because they weren't living as long, or because they were starving. If they're reptilian, not living as long would explain it entirely. Crocodiles, for example, or alligators, grow essentially their whole lives. Snakes as well, as long as they're eating. And they only stop growing if they're either literally starving to death or when they die. And so if you have very long-lived crocodiles, they get very large. There's evidence for crocodiles in the past that got extraordinarily large. We're talking like 50 feet long or something insane. The ones today top out at about 22 feet in length.
Yeah. So
scientists today claim the 50-foot ones were a different species. I would argue it's the same one that just lived longer.
That would make more sense, actually.
And dinosaurs, if the same thing happened to them, it would explain why people were able to kill them more easily in the more recent past, and why you wouldn't find as many large remains.
If they got smaller over time, it would, their strength, of course, would diminish.
Yes. And unlike mammals, their proportional size would change. So let's assume just for a moment that due to environmental changes, which we just recently were talking about, how environments change with or without human intervention. If the environment changed in a dramatic fashion, and the lifespans of creatures was reduced as a result, which is, of course, what is described in Scripture, and is what is described in terms of the global flood, that would be a major environmental change in almost all ancient cultures.
Quite so.
So if this kind of thing occurred and lifespans dropped off accordingly, what would be disproportionately affected would be reptiles. And the reason is because they grow steadily over their whole lives, whereas mammals grow in spurts.
Yeah.
And so reducing our lifespans wouldn't shrink us nearly as much. Or put another way, there's excellent evidence for beavers that were 7 feet tall. Modern beavers are about 3 feet tall.
A 7-foot beaver?
Yeah.
We
have their teeth.
Oh, God.
So why the change? Well, you could argue that these are different species that just happen to look the same. Or you could argue that beavers used to live longer, and then as a result of dietary changes, disease, environmental changes, whatever it may be, just didn't live as long, or maybe they were starving. They didn't get as much food. And as a result, were proportionally smaller. But you'll notice the difference. The beavers are only about half the height today as the ancient ones. Whereas the dinosaur version, the T-Rex example, 40, 45 feet tall versus 12.
That's quite a difference. And as Zarlath pointed out, I mean, he should know they need UVB light. So, like, especially with those volcanic eruptions, quite literally darkening the skies. If it causes a famine for us as humans already, like, imagine what it would do to the reptiles. That
exactly. And changes in humidity and temperature, like he's mentioning, absolutely. And we have evidence of this happening. Scientists today admit this kind of thing happened to the woolly mammoth. They agree, because the woolly mammoths, according to modern scientists, died. The last ones died out as midget woolly mammoths on an island. They claim that the great mammoths that used to roam around ultimately died out. Mostly were probably hunted to death and killed by environmental change as well, though there's excellent evidence that humans killed and used their body parts. And that the last ones died out just a few thousand years ago on this island, but they were smaller. They were midgets. They were like a quarter or a half the size. And the scientific explanation is that they were starving on this island, that they had overpopulated and weren't living as long. But the upshot is they weren't living as long, so they were smaller, which is essentially the argument I'm making.
Yeah. Yeah, like especially if you're isolated on an island, that would definitely make sense. And we know about like land dragons, we know about flying dragons. Josh brought this up in Germanic Norse mythology. We have, of course, Jormungandr, a sea serpent, sea dragon, if you will. Do we have records of that, or is that like truly mythological? Which also makes me think, and I put that as a answer question in the chat. Would that mean that, like, for example, the Loch Ness monster isn't a cryptid, isn't necessarily a dinosaur, or could be a dinosaur, or maybe like an aquatic dragon?
Well, it wouldn't. Well, again, remember, for our purposes, dragon and dinosaur are synonyms for the purposes of this discussion, because we're just going to use the 1900s and early, actually in really early 2000s even, version of dinosaur, which is all of the different types were called dinosaurs. Today, now in our modern day, dinosaur refers specifically to the land ones. Because reasons. Scientists like to redefine things. It's kind of annoying. But they do. Yeah. But dragon was just like that, referring to all of the various environments they would live in. And so I think that's the nearest we can get to being able to discuss them easily. And so the Loch Ness monster, I haven't looked at it in a while, but I suspect currently whatever was there is dead. For a few reasons, one of which is the rather intense efforts to scan that lake. That loch. However, including full sonar sweeps and such. However, they weren't simultaneous sonar sweeps. It's theoretically possible a creature dodged them. It wasn't like they took a single picture all at once of the entire lake bed. It was going around surveying it. But I think there probably was something there, because you get like a medieval account of it pulling a team of oxen into the lake. Well, something did that. Otherwise, why is this account even a thing?
Like, that seems to be a thing as well. Like many lake monsters, lake dinosaurs. I know that in Canada, in British Columbia, you have like in or near Lake Okanagan, I believe, the Ogopogo, as they call it. It's like the Canadian Nessie, the Canadian Loch Ness monster.
Oh yeah. So I think it's likely that they survived in that form into the near modern era. But the same is true. Hey, Raven. But the same is true for pterodactyls or their variants. And the reason I say that is because, other things, there's an account of some guys in Texas straight up just killing one and like hauling the body into town in the 1800s. And being like, what is this giant thing?
Leave it up to the Texans to find one and kill one.
Yeah. There's also, I think it was attacking their horses or something. There's also descriptions, though, of a whole group of them landing on the pyramids. We don't have pictures of it because we're talking late 1700s, early 1800s. But we have descriptions of a whole group of them landing on the pyramids. that the British were writing about.
I would love to see that.
Oh yeah,
That
if
would be
true, that would be super cool.
That would be such a spectacle. That'd be so awesome.
So that it was written about is true, but obviously there could have been someone who was just writing a fantastical piece for attention or to sell newspapers, right? We don't have physical evidence. We don't have a photograph. Photography did not yet exist.
Yeah.
But there were people still claiming this, and they weren't being shouted down or disproven. Their claims were falsifiable at the time. So obviously you can't use the scientific method to know about the past. You can't test, observe, repeat. You can't do that. What you have to do is use evidence. You have to use the evidentiary method. And in the case of like you would in court, and in the case of the ones landing on the pyramids, there are a couple different accounts of them at different times. So there's some evidence that this happened, but it's not the same level of evidence as 3 different accounts from 3 different guys and a skin hanging in the city for decades or centuries.
Yeah.
That's a different level of evidence. Because obviously if they were liars, the Romans of the period would have gone, what skin? Or would have called them out as liars, because these guys were in a legion of men who largely returned home.
Yeah.
Like there were thousands, literally thousands of men who could have gone at the time, who could have gone, you're a bunch of liars. But they didn't.
No.
And so, yeah, so that's just something to consider. That also just the quantity of these stories and accounts from around the world, and some of the suspiciously similar details, both to one another and to specific types of dinosaurs. And for the sea serpents, I think, yeah, some of the long-necked dinosaurs could give you that. But I think more likely it was something closer to those Chinese water dragons about earlier.
Yeah.
Partly because if something like that had lived in Scandinavia, even for a time, it would explain why they put dragon heads on their ships. Because broadly speaking, their ships were in the shape of those serpents. And there's even some evidence that they called their ships dragons.
Dragon boats. I mean, it's still a thing.
Yeah. Well, why? Why would you do that unless it was meant to resemble a creature?
Yeah, unless it was supposed. I mean, of course, to strike fear and like what.
But what you call it won't strike any fear, because you're not like talking with them. You're sailing up.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it could resemble a dragon like coming up from the waters if the dragon head is the first thing you see when they're coming up, and it's as you said, it has that serpent like narrow shape. Yeah, and then a bunch of like wild-eyed Vikings as the second thing you see. Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah. So my suggestion though is that those sea serpents were probably of a similar type to the ones that the Chinese were describing, and possibly of a similar type to the one being described by the Romans, what they were fighting along that river.
Yeah.
But which is different than the dragon that like Siegfried was fighting. That's a different kind of creature being described. That is not a sea serpent. The same is true for Beowulf. He's not fighting a sea serpent. He's fighting something else, still calling it a dragon, which implies, again, that there's something true of all of them that mean these are dragons, not some other creature, or they would have different names. in much the same way as we use dinosaurs to refer to a group of creatures that have some similar characteristics.
Yeah. And like with everything really, you know, animals, like everything alike, you know, it's grouped. So it's probably the species of dragon, but with just different kinds, you know, land dragon, air dragon,
Yeah.
water. Some evolve to have like smaller limbs, because I do imagine, I mean, like we see that you know, most aquatic animals, they don't have these, you know, long arms either. They have flippers, or like really shorter arms. Like if you're flying, you don't really need long arms. But if you're
Well,
if you're
well,
a
as far
land,
as the flight dragons, that's a subset. That's not too many. The ones in the
yeah,
Alps were supposed to be of that kind. If I recall correctly, the one in Beowulf is also of that kind.
mm,
The flighted dragons obviously are different in part because they're flying, unlike all the others. They're not described that way. But also in that geographically, they aren't as widespread. Like if you
yeah,
go, all right, which of the dragons are identified as flying, and you kind of put little pins in the map and look around, they're not in as big of an area, which kind of makes sense because you'd need a certain amount of calories to sustain a large creature that can fly a bunch. Like it can't just live anywhere. Also, it has to have a place to have a secure nest
yeah.
or cave or whatever to have its young and probably pretty weak offspring survive into adulthood. So it can't
So
just, yeah,
it would have to be at the very least near a mountain range.
I would think so. Mountains or perhaps steep cliffs or something. Yeah.
Yeah, which, yeah,
And that's kind of the pattern you'll see with those descriptions, right? You'll see like there's a reason they thought in the early 1800s that the last of the dragons were in the Alps.
I mean, it'd be a good place for a nest. You know, higher up in the mountains, you would be protected there. Um, like no predator really would go that high up the mountains just to grab some eggs.
And if they did, a parent, assuming it, you know, it's somewhat circled the area, would have the
Yeah,
capacity to notice them.
yeah. But with the sea serpents, sea dragons, there is so much of our oceans still unexplored.
This is
Uh,
true.
so
And
could
there
they?
are
And
terrifying creatures in the depths. One was discovered a few months ago that my co-author for Horde Wars, Nate, he's a physicist, was really excited about and was describing to me. So yeah, there are new, not new in sense that they weren't alive before, new to us creatures being discovered. However, sea serpents of the kind that the Norse were describing and of the kind the Chinese were describing, if they were still alive, I think would be very obvious for two reasons. The first is, at least for the Chinese, the description of the repeated long tracks in the mud that they made,
yeah,
going from the water to the cave and back. That would be a fairly identifiable thing. But also because in the Norse descriptions of these sea serpents, they encountered them regularly.
yeah.
So these things were not afraid of people.
I mean, if you're obviously more powerful, then yeah, I wouldn't be necessarily afraid too.
Which is to say, if they were still around, at least in quantity,
Mm-hmm.
they would be approaching people, even if not modern ships, because maybe of the noise or whatever. They'd at least approach like rowboats or kayakers or whatever. but they don't. We don't get accounts of that. We do get accounts of sharks doing that.
Yeah. No, that'd
That's-
be true. I mean, I guess, if you're in a rowboat or a kayak and you like, or just a giant sea serpent, like either as much as bumps into you, you would tell everyone. You would tell everyone, like, you're
Yeah.
not going to believe what happened to me the other day. Yeah.
In the modern era, you would expect, if it happened at all frequently, if there was a decent population of them that were doing this, you'd expect some pictures or video to surface eventually. If nothing else, because modern people are so self-absorbed and constantly photograph themselves and such. This habit would mean even someone who got killed might accidentally live stream it.
It happened before.
So that's why I think the sea serpents are probably dead. There is a little evidence that they may have still been around in the 80s. Specifically in the Sea of Japan, there was a corpse that, unfortunately, the guys who hauled it out of the water wound up tossing after taking some photos. But it could have been a plesiosaur, which is the long-necked, kind of brontosaurus-looking thing, but with flippers.
Yeah. Which also has been speculated that Nessie might be.
Yeah. So there was one of those. Let me see if I can quick pull up a photo.
But in the 80s, and they found a corpse? Because that would mean that it would have died.
Yeah, it still had meat clinging to it, and so that's what they're thinking. So let me quick pull up an image. Whoops, no, I don't want to go to the web page. Thank you. I want to open this in a new tab. That's a bad quality photo. Let me try to find a better one.
But that would mean that, like, even dinosaurs, as I guess we know them, if we're like going by the scientific dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Up until the 80s, like that's okay. That's 40 years ago.
Yeah. So let me show you that. Let me share a screen. Yeah. I want to share. I think this one. This is one of the stills taken.
Oh yeah, that's the neck, the flippers. I mean, it's in rough shape, but if it's been rotting in the water for so long, it would be. But that's definitely.
It's either a plesiosaur or a whale, one of the two.
I mean, I'm no marine biologist, but I don't know of any whale with a slender neck like that, assuming that this is indeed its neck and head, which it definitely most resembles.
Yeah, and then let me try and see if I can get you to view the other angle, which I think, let me double check.
I mean, yeah, it is in pretty rough shape, but this is not like millions of years old.
So here's the other angle.
Oh yeah, that's still bits of flesh, bits of skin,
and what appear to be flippers on the side there.
Yeah, longer neck. Yeah, that's. I mean, I would say that. Yeah, that's a plesiosaur. I mean, it's not a shark. No sharks have a long neck like that. I mean, sharks don't really have a neck anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's the wrong shape. I'd say it's too too slender for a whale, if or even like a whale like no aquatic animal that I know of. Like I said, I'm no marine biologist, but like I don't believe we have aquatic animals, at least of that size, who have a long, slender neck.
Right.
Like
so the reason a whale is a contender is, of course, we don't have the corpse. Whales obviously have flippers. And occasionally, when a whale is eaten in the right pattern or rots in the right way, you could get this shape if like part of the head fell off. And so that's why it's even
the head, the lower jaw, because that would attach. Yeah, I mean,
and so the thing is, the guys who found this were experienced fishermen, and they thought it was so unusual and weird that they hauled it onto their ship. And so that's why I think that, and they didn't even know what it was. That's why I think it's not a whale, because experienced fishermen in the Sea of Japan would probably recognize a rotting whale.
Yeah.
So to put another way, I trust the wisdom of the local fisherman more than I do the armchair scientist.
Oh, for sure. The people who are actually out on the water day in, day out, week in, week out, you know, like living with and almost among these beings. Yeah, you know, they are the scientists. They know more about them than anyone, you know, just like reading and flipping through the books and manuscripts ever will.
Well, so, yeah. And this also applies to what they thought was what scientists believed was an extinct species of fish. Millions and millions, 100 million years ago, it died off. Well, in reality, it's a living fish off the coast of Madagascar that people have been catching for time immemorial.
But, you know, trust the science.
So that's, yeah. So there, as I said, there is some evidence that there may be a few lingering, but it would be very few.
Yeah. And we have, I mean, knowing what we do with, you know, the animal kingdom, or what we do to the animal kingdom, I'd say, we would have definitely driven them to extinction, or the brink of extinction by now.
Well, yeah, I mean, we did this to other apex predators and to other non-predator species, and the various plants as well. There was a plant with excellent medicinal properties that the Romans used to death. The plant's gone, but it appears it really did work as medicine for several ailments. And it's too bad we don't have it now, because they killed all of them.
They used it so much, there is literally none left.
That's correct.
Wow. Then you're using a whole lot of it.
Well, yeah, but they did the same thing to the Nubian lion, which is a normal lion but with a black mane.
Oh, so
they hunted those to extinction. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. The one that Heracles was sent out to hunt.
Yeah. So the Nubian lion was distinct from other lions because of the black mane, and the Romans hunted it to death, largely because they were using it for performance in the Colosseum.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be shocking, especially if dragons or dinosaurs behaved the way that the ancients described them behaving, that people would want them dead, like attacking anyone who cuts down lumber in the forest, or breathing fire on you, or like.
I mean, I can definitely imagine, you know, the ancients, or less modern people being like, okay, this is not okay. They're killing us. We're just trying to do our thing here. We're trying to, you know, build and preserve even civilization. You're preventing us, so you're gonna go.
Yeah, and also if they were eating sheep and goats and people, much less robbing you of treasure. And this wouldn't be unusual exactly. I mean, there are animals that really do collect shiny objects, both birds and rodents. So it wouldn't be shocking if there was a reptile that did it. But eating people, yeah, no, that's kind of a hard line. We tend to kill those animals.
That's where we draw the line. Like livestock. Yeah, I mean, like we kind of need our livestock. I mean, there's a reason why the rune for wealth and livestock is the same rune. But yeah, we definitely draw the line at like our own kind.
Yeah, and even livestock, like that's in part what killed the Tasmanian tiger, almost probably extinct. There's a chance that recently came out, we're talking in the last 5 days, that the Tasmanian tiger may not be so dead after all. So if anyone is bored, I think his name's Forrest Gallant. He used to do stuff like on Animal Planet. He has a source who may or may not, the source claims he didn't, but given what was described, I suspect may or may not have hit one with a car.
Okay.
In the source's story, they saw this wounded dog on the side of the road and pulled over, even though they hadn't seen another car for an hour. Sure, okay. And then they got out, pulled over to the other side of the road with a flashlight and their cameras, and went to go look at it. And they got several pretty good photos of this creature. And yeah, it could be a hoax, but a number of the things are checking out. And so, yeah, if you're bored and are into cryptids, in this case, a quite real creature that is supposed to be extinct. It was declared extinct in like 1986 or something. Yeah, it turns out it may not be so dead. And so that's something fun to follow if you are into that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. That's so many species that we assumed were extinct might not be. Makes you question, like, what else are we gonna find? What else is
the interesting thing is people were hunting them partly because of a bounty, because they were killing livestock. They were killing sheep and goats. The interesting thing is this one of the photos is it running along a fence next to a sheep farm.
Okay. Yeah.
Like that, it is exactly where it should be, given why people were killing it.
You'd think they would have learned by now, but
maybe they're being more subtle, framing other animals for it.
Oh, that would be
kill the sheep and then drag the remains by somebody else's death.
Oh, they're getting too smart. They're getting too smart. Oh no, this has been fascinating. It's you have come with so many stories, so many sources. Yeah.
A lot of this stuff, you can. Now, I understand that a lot of the viewers of this channel are not Christians, and I'd prefer you were. Obviously, I am a Christian. I think that the way to salvation is through Christ. But even if you're not a Christian, if you happen to be in the United States and you want to check out more stuff about dragons, the Creation Museum, it's in like Tennessee or something. They have a bunch of really cool displays. It's Tennessee or Kentucky. They're next to each other. I was down there a few years ago. And among other things, they actually have the, if you ever seen the fish halfway through eating a fish that got fossilized?
No, can't say I have.
They have that fossil there. But they also have a lot of stories about dragons, ancient ones that I didn't cover today. The only one that I covered that they have is George and the Dragon. Okay. So if you want to learn more about that kind of thing, they've got stuff about that, like literally on the walls.
Located in Petersburg, Kentucky.
There you go.
So, Russian name, but American state.
Yeah. Oh, we steal names from everywhere.
Oh yeah, I know. It's the American Empire, and stealing
Well,
names.
plus English. English is definitely the language of pirates. We have bits and conquerors and the conquered. We have bits and pieces of probably a dozen different languages or more as major components in the English language.
Yeah. And I mean, pirates. Well, it's a language of trade, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that would make it perfect for pirates. I mean, they're into trade as well. A little different kind of trade.
Well, yeah. Once you steal the goods, you need to sell them somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't just bury the gold like.
Well, if you did, what would be the point?
I mean, just do as the pirates always did, spend it on rum and hookers.
No, that wasn't actually the only thing they did, although that is a good chunk of it. No, they were totally offloading goods to the American colonies during that period.
Mm-hmm.
And they were also selling a lot of their goods in Madagascar. Like, so when they took a ship, it wasn't like a bunch of gold usually. It'd be like a bunch of dyed cloth. They'd steal it and bring it to the Americas, selling it on the cheap, or they would bring it over to Madagascar, which was a major pirate stronghold at the time. That's a whole other topic, but yes, I have read about that. It's a fascinating subject.
Yeah, no, but yeah, thank you for coming on. It's
yeah, you're welcome, Stein.
Another 2+ hour show as we did with the show on Arthur and the Arthurian legends, as well.
If anyone does have further questions about those, the ones that we brought up, and about how to find some of the primary sources or translations of the primary sources, reach out to me on Twitter. You can direct message me. I'll do my best to point you in the right direction.
Or, leave them in the comments down below, and I'll forward them to Todd, and maybe we'll do a follow-up on this if there is enough people having questions or comments, or they think they know better. Just leave it in the comments. We'll get to it. And if you are watching, if you are listening, you haven't done so, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, check out Todd, his stuff. I have your book up in the description box down below, Horde Wars. Of course, I always make sure that my guests are accurately represented as well, and that if they have stuff that they're working on or that they're proud of, they're always welcome to present it, always welcome to promote it. And if you want to see more of what we do with the Greyhorn Pagans, you can go to our websites, www.greyhornpagans.com. You can find everything there, from the podcast that I do, the shows that Raven does, our tribal Vitki, one of the tribal elders, of course. Witchy Whispers, of course, my wife's brands, Firefay, her own brand. She will be working on it a little more. Life has gotten us both busy. Just check out our website, www.greyhornpagans.com. Everything's on there. Everything you ever need to know, everything you ever want to know about the Greyhorn Pagans. Also, our scheduling link for the podcast. If you have something you want to talk about, if you have something that you think me, my audience, or anyone else might find interesting, you can click the link, schedule yourself for a date and time that you think is appropriate, and I'll set it up and we'll have a great talk, just like the one I just had with Todd on dragons and all things dinosaurs and mythological and religious and whatever. It has been a blast. Again, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a great time, and hopefully it was of use to your audience, to kind of point them in the right direction as far as places to get good sources on this kind of topic, because you'll find a lot of spurious information on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you've given us plenty of sources, plenty of texts, plenty of stories to go from, to work with, to ponder on. I think this is something that I am definitely gonna mull over for a while, because it's a lot, but it's also fascinating. So
Cool.
yeah, once again, thank you all very much. Thanks to everyone who came in the live chats. Again, remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you think we're wrong. Leave a comment if you think we're right. Leave a comment if you think you know better. Just leave something nice. And yeah, until next time, everyone. See ya.